Hello and welcome back to Nerd Doc. With the release of Thor Love and Thunder, we got our first look at Jane Foster's Mighty Thor in the MCU. This video covers what happens to Jane Foster at the end of the movie and where we can expect her character to go next. There will be spoilers for Thor Love and Thunder. If you do not wish to be spoiled, you can check out our spoiler-free review linked below. While we have a theory as to how Jane comes back and what's next for her in the MCU, if you have your own theories or questions about our theories, leave a comment below. To better explain what happens next for Jane Foster, we'll need to go over the second post-credit scene in Thor Love and Thunder. We'll quickly cover it here, but if you're looking for a more in-depth breakdown of the scene, you can find that in our post-credit scene video linked below. In the second post-credit scene, Jane Foster finds herself in Valhalla where she meets up with Heimdall. At first you may be thinking, Jane Foster is dead, so that's the end of her time in the MCU. But Jane Foster died in the comics as well in a very similar manner. She was told she couldn't transform into Mighty Thor again or the cancer would kill her, but Jane takes on the form of Mighty Thor once more to save Asgardia in the comics, which was kind of what New Asgard is in the MCU. It's very similar to Jane's decision in Love and Thunder to become Mighty Thor one last time to save Thor and the children of New Asgard. After Jane dies in the comics, Thor and Odin use the power of the god Tempest held within Mjolnir to bring her back to life. From there we get the War of the Realms, which Jane Foster participates in and eventually leads to her becoming Valkyrie, but we'll get into that in a moment. If you follow our Instagram, you may already know that there have been a number of rumors from reliable sources concerning Jane Foster's return after Love and Thunder. All of these point to Jane getting her own Disney Plus series or theatrical movie in the future. Given the post-credits scene in Love and Thunder, that's all but confirmed at this point, but how Marvel handles her return is the question. Some other sources have hinted at Jane becoming Valkyrie in the future. That lines up with what happens in the comics, but that only happens after Valkyrie dies. While the MCU doesn't always follow the comics to the T, at this point it seems likely that in the Jane Foster solo series or movie, we'll see Valkyrie die and Jane take over that mantle like she does in the comics. All this happens around the time of the War of the Realms, in which Malekith invades Earth. We basically saw something kind of similar to that in the MCU with Thor the Dark World. While Malekith had a ship dropped on him at the end of that film, it's not out of the question to see him return, but would Marvel do that in the MCU or just have someone else threaten the Earth? While there's quite a bit to the War of the Realms, it would still end up being somewhat similar to what we saw in Thor the Dark World, mainly with the Dark Council attacking Earth instead of just Malekith. It would basically be a number of Thor's enemies all attacking Earth at the same time, with Malekith leading them. It would be difficult to do the War of the Realms without also including Thor, Odin, and a bunch of other heroes, but the MCU has done more with less. Ideally, you'd want the 6-hour runtime of a Disney Plus series, but an MCU version could be done over the span of a 2-hour movie if Marvel really wanted to go that route and truncated the story a bit similar to what they did with Civil War. Whether we get the War of the Realms or not, Jane Foster is returning, and during her next project, Valkyrie will likely die, at least temporarily. Asgardians tend to come back a lot in the MCU.
I beg your pardon.
Instead of bringing in Thor and Odin, Marvel could use this opportunity to introduce someone like Beta Ray Bill, who Christian Bale was actually rumored to be playing in Love and Thunder before it was announced he would be Gore the God Butcher. Valkyrie is also rumored to make an appearance in the Marvels, which could be where she dies, but we'll have to see how Marvel handles that. It would make more sense for her to die in the Jane Foster series or movie, but it might have more emotional impact if she dies in the Marvels, assuming she's dating Captain Marvel, which is rumored but unconfirmed. Since Jane is currently in Valhalla, it's also not out of the question to see Heimdall, Odin, Frigga, the Warriors 3, Scourge, or even Loki show up at some point. The Asgardians have really had it rough in the MCU. A lot of them have died, and while some were bad guys, they all had heroic deaths fighting for the people of Asgard. All of them could be in Valhalla and ready to help Jane Foster with her next adventure. In short, Thor, or possibly Odin, will likely resurrect Jane. Valkyrie will die, allowing Jane to take over that mantle. Jane will get help from Thor, Beta Ray Bill, or any number of fallen Asgardians, and she'll be fighting against an unknown antagonist that may or may not be Malekith and the Dark Council. This could also be a good time to bring Odin back, since someone would need to rule over Asgard if King Valkyrie dies, but it might also be time for Thor to take over the throne, with Thor 5 perhaps making that a reality and even getting into the Bor storyline with Thor's grandfather and Loki being back to Loki. We'll discuss this more in our video on what's next for Thor and his new family in the MCU, but what do you think? Are you excited to see Jane return and a possible introduction to Beta Ray Bill? Does a Jane Foster project need Thor to be included? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. For now, that wraps up this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who loves Jane Foster's Mighty Thor.